When Hornet is about to perform an attack, she yells out one of a few iconic voice lines. Hearing this, some new players will attempt to predict Hornet's next attack with reference to what she just called out. But to our disappointment, Hornet's voice lines don't reveal her next attack. Rather, they are seemingly just chosen at random. So this raises the question, should Hornet's voice lines be tied to specific attacks? Maybe and maybe not. I'm Holland and this is Behind the Boss. Hornet is known as the protector of Hallownest. A fierce warrior, she wields a needle and thread in battle. Rumors have it she's the child of 3 queens, born by one, raised by one, and trained by one, the last of which she also took her name from. When we first meet Hornet, it's hard to tell whether she's friend or foe. After keeping her distance throughout Greenpath, she eventually decides to let us catch up and challenges us to a fight. Later, having met her again in City of Tears, we make our way to the Grave in Ash, where we must once again prove ourselves by defeating her in battle. After doing so, she's finally willing to aid us in our journey to rediscover the past and reach the true ending of the game. Fighting a boss in Hollow Knight is like dancing with a partner, and the Hornet fight is very close to feeling like the perfect dance. Watching professional players strike her at every opportunity, even while she's jumping, you get a real sense of how interactive the fight can be if you know what you're doing. And even for those less experienced at the game, as you start to learn how to avoid each of Hornet's attacks, the fight begins to feel more and more like a real duel. But why is that? How come Hornet feels so good to go up against? Well, I think it has a lot to do with how dynamic the fight is. Hornet achieves dynamism in a few marked ways. Firstly, she's knocked backwards when struck by the nail. There's something about being able to push the boss that makes it feel more like a real opponent and not just a punching bag. You can really feel the boss enduring your blow. Secondly, Hornet never teleports. Although her jumping around the arena has its own associated problems, it nonetheless makes her feel more like an equal to you. Like you both have to abide by the same rules. If she wants to go somewhere in the arena, she has to get there by jumping, running, or dashing, just like you would. For gameplay purposes, I usually prefer bosses that teleport, but teleporting enemies do tend to make fights seem less dynamic. Thirdly, Hornet never prevents you from interacting with her for more than a second or so. For counterexamples, think of Grim during his balloon phase or Umu during most of the fight. Both become partly or fully invulnerable to attacks, making you have to wait before you can engage with them again. But Hornet doesn't pull any tricks. There's always something to do against her, whether that be by removing the obstacles she places in the arena, striking at her, or getting in position for a spell attack. These reasons work together to make Hornet one of the most dynamic fights in Hollow Knight. She's also one of the few bosses to only see improvements in her rematch, and both Protector and Sentinel are wonderful fights. Wow, that's a lot of positives, Holland. What about the negatives? My main issue with Hornet, and one reason why I can't say she's strictly more fun than bosses like Soulmaster, is because she's one of the main offenders of poor repositioning. I've linked to a video in the description that delves deeper into this topic, what I call the repositioning problem, and so instead of talking about it here, I'd urge you to go and watch that video after you're done with this one. All I can say for now is that Hornet is a prime example of this issue. But to Hornet's credit, and my own wonder and amazement, I have a hard time coming up with other things I don't like about the fight. There are small issues, like how when she lands up against the wall after dashing, she can accidentally hit you when dismounting from the wall, but again, that's a lesser nitpick. There is also a hilarious bug in Godhome, where you can get Hornet stuck on the wall just by having her dash against it, because the arena wasn't built like it was in the original fight. Note that this only works against the Sentinel version, but those last 2 points aside, Hornet is a really fun and well-designed fight. When I encountered Hornet for the first time, back when I had never played the game before, I did something that perhaps some of you did too. I tried to suss out which voice line corresponded to which attack. Like when Hornet yells out, does she always perform the lunge afterwards? Now, for anyone who's played Hollow Knight before, that may sound stupid. Hornet's voice lines are seemingly just randomized for each attack. But I've seen others make the same mistake of trying to predict Hornet's next move by listening to what she's saying, and at some point I started to wonder if specific voice lines should correspond to specific attacks. In some ways, it kind of felt like a missed opportunity that they don't. So why don't they? Well, first of all, it would make the fight easier. Knowing which attack Hornet was going to execute next would only benefit the player. But in many ways, this is a weak counter-argument, because if it really made the fight too easy, you could always just improve the difficulty in other ways, like making her act quicker. And how much of a boon would it really be? You can already see what Hornet is going to do before she does it. Well, except for when she jumps. The second reason I have not to tie voice lines to attacks is, I think, more reasonable, and that's because it's done nowhere else in the game. Now, maybe audio telegraphs should be utilized not only in the Hornet fight, but during other fights as well, but right now they aren't. And why teach the player to listen out for voice lines when it turns out not to be helpful throughout the rest of the game? Thirdly, if fights were designed around audio, you'd always have to play with the sound turned up. Personally, I like to play Hollow Knight while listening to a podcast, and so that could actually become somewhat annoying. And so remains the question, should Hornet's voice lines be tied to specific attacks? Surprisingly, I'm still unconvinced either way. Because it's not all bad, I like rewarding observant players, and you probably could still just play with the sound turned off. But would it teach the player a bad lesson? That voice lines in Hollow Knight are always tied to specific actions when they currently aren't? Well, probably. And I actually do think I prefer Hollow Knight as it is right now, where you don't have to rely on auditory cues. Whatever you think about voice lines corresponding to specific attacks, you have to admit that it's at least a fun idea to play with. For Hornet herself, had she managed better repositioning, she might have been one of my favorite bosses. But regardless, she's still a terrifically designed boss. Thank you so much for watching. I'm genuinely torn on whether tying specific voice lines to specific attacks would be an overall benefit or not, so I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And to remind you again, I've linked my video on the repositioning problem down in the description. I'd really urge you to go watch it if you haven't. It's quite a heated debate over there. And have a wonderful day. Bye!